Today, I've got a great guest joining me. I'm going to be joined by Henna Pryor right now. And for those of you who know Henna, you know she is the master of sales messaging and copy, specifically for the recruiting industry here. Henna is the president and founder of Pryority Group, and she has 14 years of top performing recruiter, and then turned herself into an ICF-Certified executive coach and staffing trainer. And she's also the creator of Recruiters Copy Clinic, which is the nation's premier sales messaging and copywriting masterclass exclusively for the recruiting and staffing professionals. Henna, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you. I was laughing when you said master of sales messaging. I said, what's the female version of that? Am I the mistress of sales messaging or something like that? I love it. You can call me whatever you want. I love it.
Awesome. Well, thank you for joining me here today. You know, before we get into the good stuff, can you mind sharing a couple personal highlights that are going on in the personal life right now?
Personal world, personal life. Well, I've had a double vaccine, so can we start with that? Woo, like a little bit of normalcy coming back. No, it's been an amazing couple of years. So I left Kforce in 2019 after 14 amazing years. Was a top 10% producer the whole time and made a pivot to executive coaching and training. And honestly, I'll kind of start from a personal standpoint. I feel like everybody should know about me that I'm an accidental staffing and recruitment trainer. I had no plans to be on this side of the coin, but you know, my journey kind of took me to this realization that there was a real training gap in this particular space as it relates to staffing and recruitment. And so it's been the joy of my life that over the last year, this program has, you know, nothing short of blown up and been really, really popular. And kind of spend my days now doing that. I'm working with leaders and, you know, executives on one side and teaching staffing and recruiting and sales folks how to write better messages on the other. So life is busy. Good.
Excellent. And for those of you just joining in right now, I'm joined with Henna Pryor. We're going to be talking about sales messaging and sales copy. So keep your questions ready if you have them. We will be diving into that here soon. So keep those questions ready and you can ask those here soon. Henna, how did you get into the recruiting industry in general?
I call myself, I was going to say the queen of the pivots, but I'm the mistress of the pivot. I started my career at Ernst & Young. So I was actually a finance major. I went into the Big Four, did that for 3 years. So I was in the accounting world, realized quickly I like to talk too much to be an auditor. And so I thought, what can I do with this skill set? Which led me to finance and accounting staffing, which then became a 14-year career. At which point, again, after an amazing 14 years and with a very heavy heart, I decided to pivot again. But it was just taking what I had a skill set and a knowledge in and making that first pivot into something that had me working with people more, which is something I really enjoyed.
Nice. And were you at Kforce the entire time?
I was at Kforce the entire time. I technically was finance and accounting direct hire, but I also was part of the 2008-2009 recession in which no one was hiring finance and accounting direct. So I've done tech, I've done marketing, I've done ops, I've done a whole lot of contract, retained, contract to hire. I mean, everything under the sun. I did it all.
Yeah. It's really interesting that you bring up that you went from finance and accounting to recruiting. And the reason I find it interesting is because you're probably the fourth or fifth person that's gone from accounting and financing to recruiting. Why? What is it about accounting and finance to recruiting that makes sense?
Yeah, you know, I think people, especially that start in that industry, it's something that requires some technical aptitude. It's a lot of left brain, but if you are someone who likes to really engage with people, if you like to get underneath of, you know, someone's resistance or fears or dreams, if you have that sort of urge to know someone's personality, that bit in most accounting and finance is back office at the end of the day. And so if there's a hunger for that, there's something there that's not fed. But moving into staffing allows you to use that knowledge base, which is quite deep, and use it in a way that's very people serving. So I feel like everyone I know that's been there and has gone to staffing has actually done quite well. Seems to be a good transition.
Yeah, absolutely. I find it interesting. You're like I said, I've a couple of my clients, same exact story. So that's awesome. I mean, when you made that transition, what was the kind of biggest challenge for you going from, you know, kind of crunching numbers to the gift of gab, so to speak.
Yeah, I had never been in sales. I mean,
Yeah.
I'd been a server in college, right? And I think I worked, I'm from Delaware originally. So everybody that grew up in Delaware worked at, it was then MBNA, it's now Bank of America, but everyone was like a telemarketer for one summer. But that was the extent of my sales journey. So I had to figure out how this whole sales game worked pretty early. So I ran a full desk. So I did candidates and clients. I didn't really have familiarity with any of it, but I will say I'm a lifelong student. I'm a lifelong learner. I love to read. I love to learn. So for me, it wasn't really so much nerve-wracking to join the staffing industry, but exciting. It was like all this stuff to learn. I get to learn this whole new world. And so I just poured myself into it and tried to just take it one day at a time.
Right. Now, I know that you kind of said earlier that you kind of fell into being a trainer kind of by necessity, but when you decided to leave the staffing industry, I know that wasn't the natural plan. What was the plan? What were you going for?
Well, the plan is still what I do 50-60% of the time. So I got my leadership coaching, executive coaching certification from American University down in DC. So half or more than half of what I do is working with leaders, executives, VP, directors, C-suite on a variety of things, conflict resolution, motivating teams, things like that. But the other half of what I do, or that math doesn't add up, the other 40% of what I do, I was good at math as an accountant. The other bit of what I do was kind of born from this realization, right? So I was in staffing for a decade and a half. I've always been a writer, which is not something everyone knows about me. I did journalism in high school and college. I had a blog back when everybody had a blog, personal blog, not necessarily business. And I've always enjoyed that. And then when I went through my coaching certification, coaching is very heavily rooted in psychology. And so all of a sudden, I had this aha moment. Everyone for years would say, how are you so successful at Kforce, even after you had kids, even after you started working, 40% less than you used to, you still hit these numbers. And I didn't know the answer. I was like, I guess I'm just like a super mom who's really efficient with her time. Isn't that how all moms become, right?
Right.
Or I just build trust, relationships, all the things that certainly matter, but I didn't really have a single source solution. And I realized after I got done my coaching program, what I was naturally interested in, good at, and passionate about learning was this intersection of all of those things, which is essentially the field of written psychology.
Right.
I realized nobody was picking this bad boy up anymore. Like 5-6 years ago, I started to notice that this was going right to voicemail more often than not. And so I started to self-teach, how do these things intersect, and work together? How do we start to make messaging compelling, curiosity inducing? How do I make sure that my response rates are super high? How do I make sure that my messages are all getting opened and read? So I started to self-teach and realized about a year and a half ago that no one was teaching folks in staffing and recruiting how to write effective sales messages. It's still being done in the way we learned it in 8th grade English class.
Right.
Most people are still writing that way, which is not sales messaging. That's literary writing. Sales messaging is a totally different animal, right? Yeah, exactly. Pride and Prejudice, right? Like Crime and Punishment. That's how we've been taught to write.
Right. I love it. When did you really realize that you kind of had a skill for this?
Very early on. I mean, my coworkers would always say, God, like your emails are so good. God, how do you write that stuff? I can't even write like that. I try. And so early on, my coworkers had made comments about it. I kind of poo-pooed it away. Like what, these, right? What, these old things? Like, I don't think I realized the impact they were having, but if I reverse engineer now, they were having a massive impact. The response rates were high, meaning my conversion rates were high, meaning my getting people on the phone was high.
Right.
I didn't recognize it for being as powerful as it was when I was living it because I thought everyone else was doing that too.
Awesome. So guys, we're live here with Henna Pryor. We're going to be digging in now to some sales mastery, some messaging, and some copy. Henna's going to provide some tips for us. So feel free to ask any questions that you may have. I think to kick us off, how do you define sales messaging? Like, what is that? What does that mean?
Yeah. So a sales message is a written communication. Largely when we say sales message, it's like an email or an in-mail. I do also teach about, LinkedIn posts, et cetera. But a sales message is a message that goes out to someone with the intention that someone is going to do something. So this isn't just checking in on their weekend. This isn't just saying a friendly hello. This is after they read our message. We want someone to do something. We want them to reply. We want them to call us. We want them to click this link. We want them to take some specific action. That is a sales message.
Perfect. Perfect. Love it. So before we talk about what good is, can I put you on the spot and ask, can you throw off an off the cuff example of what a bad sales message would look like?
Sure. I'd be happy to, Donnie. So the quintessential, and is going to trigger a whole bunch of people. So everyone who's listening to this, I'm sorry, but this is the truth. You need to hear it. Is the 99% of messages that start with, "Hi, I'm so-and-so from such and such firm. I've been here for this many years. We specialize in this. We do that." Not a good way to start a sales message. Not a good way. It's all about you. It's all about your experience, your credibility, and the fact remains, and the research supports, no one cares. No one cares quite yet. They're not interested in your whole laundry list of qualifications, your pedigree. That's not their concern yet. It's not that we'll never talk about that. We'll talk about it later, but that's the one giant mistake that people make.
Right. I love it. I love it. So what is kind of that first intro? What should that look like? What's that first kind of premise of reaching out?
The way an email should start, a sales email should start, not every email, but the way a sales prospecting email should start, I always say, is from the you perspective, right? Perspective taking, empathy. I understand you. I understand your situation. I relate to what you're going through. I know based on my experience working with similar people, or I know based on the research in the industry and my expertise, that this is likely to be the situation that you're facing right now.
Right.
Everyone wants to be the hero of the sales message that is reading it. So they don't want you to be the hero of the sales message that you're sending. Your reader wants to be the hero. They want to picture themselves getting the results. They want to picture themselves being of service in this message. And so we make a mistake by starting from the I or the me or the we. They should always start from the you perspective.
Yep. Got it. What's in it for them?
What's in it for them? Always. Yep. Features and benefits. We talk a lot about that in the training.
Yep. I love it. I love it. And, you know, I mean, I know a lot of things with like a sales message. I mean, what do you kind of respond of like, okay, I don't want to just reach out and be pushy with somebody, you know? No. Is that like an approach, or are you a believer that like, hey, good copy can push you or not? And I don't want to say pushy, but like, hey, if I want to come out, I've just interacted with you, I connected with you on LinkedIn. Am I being too aggressive by basically coming out and going for an ask right away? What are your thoughts on something like that?
I can't speak for everyone, but I don't believe in pushy. I've never been pushy a day in my life. I would not enjoy working in sales if I was pushy. It's just not my style. I do believe that there's a big distinction between pushy and aggressive and clear and direct.
Right.
And sometimes we confuse those two things. I think you can be clear and direct and specific and obvious without being pushy or aggressive or unnaturally assertive or annoying, quite frankly. You know, I think that it can be a fine line between the two things sometimes, but I think that you can be one without being the other. So there is a difference between the two.
Right. Do you have any kind of examples off the top of your head of like what would be pushy versus what would be, you know, kind of more just a direct type of an approach?
Sure. So let's use the example of a call to action. So call to action at the end of the email is just the little bit of writing that asks someone what you want them to do next. Right. So pushy would be something like, I know this is the best candidate for you. Let's put them on your calendar for tomorrow at 2 p.m. That's a little pushy, right? Clear and direct is, I'd love to tell you more. Can I call you at 2 p.m. tomorrow for a chat about it?
Got it.
Clear and direct, but not pushy. Still polite, still has manners behind it, but not pushy. Right.
I love it. That's really good stuff. And when you're looking at like, you know, like the rest of the format, like what is the typical length that you're recommending, you know, especially like if we're just talking about like a LinkedIn or an email, you know, I always have kind of just had the thinking of like shorter is better just because of attention spans and things like that. But what do you do and what are you recommending out there?
Yeah, so length is one of those tricky conversations. Generally, the rule of thumb I follow is as short as possible to cover the essentials while being long enough that it's still interesting, right?
Right.
So length is not everything. Some people get really hung up on this many words is the best email. There is no such thing. There's no such thing as this many words is the best email. If it's a little longer, but it's interesting to the person, that's fine. If it's a little longer because it's explaining what you know about that person and their industry and their function, that's okay. If it's longer because you're going into a laundry list of things about your firm that nobody asked you about, that's a different conversation. So it needs to be short enough that it does keep their attention, to your point, but long enough that it covers their potential objections, the potential reasons they would say no, the things that make them worry that you don't know what you're talking about. So there's an art and science. In my training, I go through a kind of a framework that covers, there's sort of 3 things that influence how long it should be. And it's, how expensive is this to the person? Is it a candidate that's not paying for your services? Is it a client that's about to pay you a hefty fee? Do they know your firm? Do they know you already? Have they ever worked with the staffing firm? There's a number of different factors that can go into, or even on the internal recruitment side, a number of different factors that go into it, but long enough to be interesting, short enough to make sure that the essentials are covered.
Right. Got it. One of the things I've always found interesting, like as I've been in the industry and working with some of these things, is a lot of people kind of take, and I think you brought it like the 8th grade style. I kind of call it, you're basically trying to take the cold calling approach and bring it online. Right. Yeah. And I think one of the challenges that a lot of people have is like, well, what is the premise of me reaching out? If like we're talking about BD, obviously a candidate, hey, I've got a role, we can talk about that, but if I'm doing BD and I don't want to sound like just every other recruiter, like what kind of premise or what are you kind of recommending for people to kind of use as a hook point to reach out, so to speak?
Yeah, if you're doing general pipelining, I'm going to back into this. There's always a reason that you're reaching out. Yeah. You know it, you just have to articulate it. So if you're reaching out to a business for a business development call with a client that you've never done business with, I would hope that you know something about that industry or something about that team, and you would have some idea of the types of roles that that person is looking to hire. Right. So have some knowledge about, this is what I know about your team. This is what I know about your industry. This is why I think, based on others that I've talked to in similar searches that I've worked on, I might be uniquely qualified to talk with you a little bit about it. But there needs to be some effort on the side of the BD person to understand what's happening on this side. The thing that's gotten very frustrating in sales messaging is people take one blanket template. They're trying to find the shortcut all the time. One blanket template. This is my powerful magic template that I'm just going to send to everybody. There's zero segmentation. There's zero thought. I think that you can absolutely use automation very well. I think you can use systems very well, but you can't do it the lazy way. There still has to be intention behind it. And so if it's a BD conversation, what do you know about that company? What do you know about that department? What do you know about that team? We can't be so lazy that we just go at it blanket and then wonder why it's not working. Right. You have to have something.
Some personalization. Yeah. I'd agree. And I think that's the hard part about automation is people think automation takes, everything away, and really good automation is actually when you're creating more time for the human element.
Yes.
In personalizing it. People don't, they think automation, they think of thousands. I think a lot of time it's like, hey, look, I can automate a message to 10 people hyper-focused to that audience with this very specific message. So happy you bring that up, because I think that's a common confusion.
Yeah, it's got to be in addition to, not in place of. Automation is meant to enhance your actual one-on-one or blast efforts. It's not meant to replace them. And, I think the people that are finding that out the hard way are seeing that. They're seeing that it's not working the way that they hoped it would.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. And for those of you that are listening with us live right now, feel free to chime in with any questions. Frequency, right? I've got a candidate. I reach out with a message on Monday. He doesn't respond. When am I following up?
Yeah, a couple days is my general, unless it's a contract position, then maybe the next day, right? It depends. Again, I hate to say it depends for everything. It depends on
obviously
the passive perm candidate, maybe a few days. If it's a hot contract candidate, maybe the next day. In general, though, what I'm going to talk about more than frequency is, you may have to do it a couple times, but the mistake people make is they follow up the original communication with just following up. Like, we know what you're doing, rather than a just following up email. There's also an art and science to a follow-up email. It should be really a fresh email, a fresh second email, and if needed, a fresh third email. No one likes just following up. None of us. If we get an email from my husband and I are buying my parents like second home from them.
Mm-hmm.
And if I get something from my mortgage banker and the subject line says just following up, you know what I hear? I hear being annoying and bothering you because I don't have this thing yet that I want you to give to me and you haven't gotten back to me on.
Yeah.
That's what anybody who gets a just following up or just checking in, that's what we hear. So the subject line should never be just following up or just checking in. And it shouldn't also just be a forward of the thing. I either saw the thing and purposely ignored it, or I saw the thing and didn't plan to get back to it. The second follow-up and the third follow-up should be a fresh attempt. You can still have the other one beneath, but it should be a fresh attempt.
Right. Now, when you're saying a fresh attempt, and this brings up, I think, a really good, conversation here. When you're saying a fresh attempt, like, are you going with a whole different angle, or is it just an angle that follows on the first premise that you reached out anyways?
Either or, it depends. Depends what depends what the original angle was.
Right.
But when I say fresh attempt, it's not that you're not allowed to forward the original email.
Right.
But I don't want the subject line to be, FW : the thing, nor do I want it to be following up on the below. Right. I want it to be a fresh subject line with something of quality to say in the body beyond just making sure you saw this down here. Right. It's got to be something that at least delivers on an additional thought, right? Maybe it's that you share a new thought. Maybe it's that you try a new angle. By the third time, again, it's a little bit of a strategic fresh attempt. And I do have a free follow-up emails guide if people want to, not to plug, but if they want to go to recruiterscopyclinic.com, right at the top, there's a link. It's a free guide just on this, on follow-up emails. But the fresh attempt essentially gives you a chance to get fresh eyes on it. Yep. Most people are just going to immediately go, just following up. Nah, I ignored this the first time. Thanks for making it easy for me again. Right? Just
perfect. Yep. That's awesome. Excellent stuff. And I actually had a question came in here. So this question from Katie. How you doing, Katie? Thank you for joining us. With your techniques, what % of LinkedIn acceptances / replies to messages do you hope to see when you're doing your trainings and stuff like that?
Yeah. So, Katie, it depends on the starting point. So I don't usually measure total amount of acceptances. I try to measure improvement from where you started. So it really depends on where you start. I'll tell you that I am pretty darn close to like an 80 to 90% acceptance rate. And pretty much all of my in-mails get opened. I don't tend to get a lot of ignores and deleted. Back in my staffing days, people who were being bombarded, I mean, I would aim for a 50% success rate, which in our industry is considered high. So 50% is what I was shooting for. And I would say I pretty consistently got close to that on well thought out in-mails. On connection requests, I mean, I was north of that. I would probably say more like 50 to 70% on people that would accept the connection request. But again, I have always been very strategic about it. I've always been very thoughtful about what goes in it because I feel that to me, it's paid dividends over time. It's been worth the money, worth the time every single time. Yep.
Excellent. And what do you think, you bring up the thing in-mails. I've had a couple of people on the show here. We've talked a lot about in-mails just because people have just seen the effectiveness of them going down. And I think a lot of it is because of the lazy approach that half people are taking.
Yep.
So no, I mean, I see an in-mail, I know I'm being pitched. I ignore them. I never even open them, never even read them. Like I think that it's challenging, but like, what is your thought? I know that some of that is, copy related for sure.
For sure.
But are you seeing a trend too, that just the overall effectiveness of LinkedIn in-mails are down, or like, hey, I don't care. My students that have the copy down are still flying high.
Yeah. I don't see it as down as making it seem. I think the reality is most in-mails have terrible subject lines and terrible copy.
Right.
Are the effectiveness of those down? Yes, but I have been able to rise above the noise, and a lot of my previous students have been able to rise above the noise. So it's about, acknowledging what you just said. We are in an overcrowded, distracted, noisy marketplace.
Yep.
And so you can't rise above the noise on volume alone. You can't send more in-mails and say, I'm going to rise above the noise. You need to have an actual strategy for what's going into that subject line, what's going into that first couple of sentences, what's going into the content of the email that's actually going to elicit a response. Part of what I'm passionate about in the topic of copy is also just making sure that what people are learning is systems agnostic. So in this moment in time, email, LinkedIn is a lot of the conversation, but what I teach is not dependent on a system. If LinkedIn blows up tomorrow, if it just shuts down, the whole thing goes sideways,
Right.
Whatever the new thing is that ends up replacing it, or whatever the new trend is, this is it's an evergreen skill. Being able to do business writing, sales writing is an evergreen skill. It's been around for centuries. It'll be around for more centuries. And so what I hope people take is, don't ever become so overly reliant on a single platform for anything. Right. That's the one that people are using now, but I hope that this skill, you can use it in email, you can use it in text, you can use it in video, you can use it in audio, whatever ends up being the next turn of the wheel or the next wave. This set of principles is going to take you through to whatever it is next.
Right. Love it. So another question came in from Tim. What's up, Tim? Hope you're doing well, bud. Which is more important, getting the prospect to engage or getting your content in their hands so you can leave your content with the people, or have a smaller group request it before you send it?
Number one, I don't even have to think about it. Number one. We care too much about our content. And part of what I teach in my training is, how do you get engagement? How do you get engagement from a potential prospect, be it a candidate, a client, a hiring manager? How do you get engagement from someone? It's a combination of two things. It's content, as Tim mentioned, it's our information, our stuff, and it's context. What is that person dealing with? What's happening in their world? What is their situation? What is their need? Their need is not the same as this person's need, which is not the same as this person's need. And we get in a really bad habit of just lumping everyone together. Everyone does not use recruiters or staffing firms the same way. They might all benefit from our service, but they don't all benefit from it in the exact same way. And so if you have a choice between prioritizing, I really don't care about getting just content into anyone's hand. It has to be a combination of content and context if you want to do the first one, which is engage someone.
Right. And when you're saying engage, you're talking about just conversation.
Get a response.
Get
a response. And I think this is where, again, there's a little bit of an impatience issue that we all understandably are dealing with right now. Your job in a sales message is not to immediately get the candidate's resume or immediately get the job order. If you can, awesome. I've had those days. They're great, right? When you immediately get it, awesome. But your goal is to get to the next step. And whether that's getting the person on the phone, getting them to reply, getting them to agree to a conversation, that's your goal. The goal of a sales message is to move the person to that next step, whatever it may be. It's not to get the end goal already. If you get it, great, but that's not the goal.
Oh, so you're not supposed to try to sell through your messaging?
Small sell, baby sell, not big sell, baby sell.
Yeah, I love it. Earlier you brought up a really great point, and I think it's something that people overlook. And I think it's actually probably the most important part, especially on email, which is your subject line. If you don't have a good subject line, people just flat out aren't going to open it.
Yeah. And that's the part that most people don't even give any thought to. It's the subject lines have been very, very overused for now probably 10 to 20 years, right? Mm-hmm. New role, new tax role, new opportunity, great candidate. It's these throwaway, I call them throwaway subject lines. And you have to really think about, how many emails do you get in a day? So the data, I think the data from last year, it's probably gone up this year, is 121 emails per day. If you're a professional who works at a desk, and it probably is something similar for people who don't work at a desk anymore, but 121 emails per day, most of which end up deleted or ignored. Most of which end up deleted or ignored before they even get opened, because the subject line did nothing to make the person want to open the message. So, after my days of training, usually a question I get is, where do I start? What's the first thing? If I implement one thing, what do I do?
Right.
Work on your subject lines, because it doesn't matter what gold is held within if no one opens it.
Exactly. Right? Yeah.
No one opens it. So it's critical. You have to dial in the subject lines. You have to have a strategy around your subject lines. It can't just be wildly guessing and throwing up volume in hopes that a few people open. It's not a strategy. That's volume. That's it.
Yeah, no, and I find that is the biggest challenge, is even not even just with, just straight sales copy and, email or LinkedIn messaging, but, even when we're doing like our email campaigns or titling, content that we're creating, is like, that is what hooks people in. And
yeah,
you spend so much time on creating the content, and there's nothing worse than creating that and then, oh, nobody watched it, nobody read it, nobody opened it.
It breaks my heart when someone's invested all this money into a really great like marketing platform. They put all this heart into a newsletter, an email, their open rate's 3%.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and open rates are a massive challenge now anyways. I mean, you forget about subject lines. When you start talking about what Google and Microsoft are doing with these inboxes, it's tough to get through. It is absolutely tough to get through.
Yeah, it's tough, but it's not impossible. And a lot of people have opportunity to multiply the amounts that they're getting now. And, it does requires effort, requires a little bit more effort than people thought they had to put in before.
Yep. Yeah. The effort, I think it's like the Amazon world now, right? It's like, if you want if you want some toilet paper, just order it on Amazon, you'll have it tomorrow. Right. And I think that's how we're programmed in society now, is like, oh, well, shoot, I want new sales for my business. I'm going to start sending messages. I should have a new business tomorrow. And it just doesn't work that way. But
the thing that comes up a lot is, especially, I train people who have been in the business 2 days, and then I train people who've been in the business 30, 40 years. And the 30, 40 year folks always say to me, man, my emails really for a long time, they've sucked. Like I didn't realize how bad they were. And I stop them and I say, I promise you they haven't. It just didn't matter before.
Right.
It just didn't matter before. The buyer experience, the buyer's market, the way people engage with digital communication is wildly different than it was 10 years ago. When I started in the business in 2005, it didn't matter that much. It was secondary. It was mostly me leaving the voicemail, me getting them on the phone. And then the email was sort of the secondary thing. It's just no longer the case. Most people read their email before they listen to their voicemail. Hell, most people read their voicemail before they listen to their voicemail. So it's just changed. Digital communication has changed, and we need to catch up with it. That's all.
100%. Switching kind of sides a little bit. I know, or at least the way I understand is most of your focus is more on just sales, copy and message. Do you dabble much into the content side, content creation?
I do. So I do believe I do talk about it a little bit. I do believe that thought leadership matters. So I'm not a branding person. I don't really think about like company level brand strategy. I will defer to folks like you and others who do this much better than I do. But I do believe that in 2021 and beyond, you have to have a digital footprint. Everybody's saying 2021 beyond is the, year plus of remote selling. Your digital networking, your digital footprint, your presence, and your thought leadership matter more than ever before. So I do spend some time talking about, from an individual level, again, not necessarily at a brand level, but individual level, you need to show up. You need to show up with some consistency, have a point of view, have something to say. Most people don't know how to do that. They don't have a strategy for how to do that. So part of what I do provide and teach is a framework and a strategy for how to do that with a level of consistency without wanting to like bang your head against the window, trying to figure out what to say. But I do believe that it's important. And I know you believe in that as well with what you teach, just the visibility piece.
Yeah. Well, I think it's just, I don't think it's a choice anymore. Kind of like you're saying, hey, it's the phone thing, and it's all elements, right? You got to be good at messaging. That's obviously incredibly important, but then the content side of it drives more opportunity, should make the messaging responses even easier, should be aligned strategically with all of those approaches. And, it's just, that's where you can get more inbound action. Right. And I think one of the things that a lot of recruiting companies are missing out on is empowering their employees to be little mini branding ambassadors for them.
I'm a firm believer in that, that even somebody 2 weeks in the business, if you don't have your own bank of case studies to lean on, I get it. You're 2 weeks in the business, but your team does.
Right.
Your office does. There's no reason not to do it.
Right. Absolutely. Well, my buddy, Brent, he was on the show, I don't know, about a month ago, and he was independent last year, and he's brought on 2 recruiters, since last year, and both of them now basically mirror his digital approach. And what they're seeing as a response in business is just absolutely insane, because he's in, and I think a lot of employers have like, well, I don't want my employees to say anything because I don't want their message to be off mark, or I don't, and man, I mean, if you're leaving a lot on the table with that idea.
Yeah. I mean, the stats are there, and I know you know them, like 45% of managers, and I think 50% of C-suite, they'll say that something like 7 to 10 pieces of content, viewing 7 to 10 pieces of leadership or thought leadership content will directly have them do business with someone. And it's not about, I mean, we're all growing up in the influencer world. It's not necessarily that the people who are considered experts are the best at what they do. They're just most visible. They're just there. So people are like, oh, they must be the best at that because I see their name everywhere. They're not the best at that, but they're just doing a good job making you see them. So we now perceive them as the best at that. And I've had previous clients, they do exactly this. They've got people on their team showing up every day, and all of a sudden their calls are, coming through left and right because all of a sudden they're the experts in the industry.
Well, and I think you drive home like a huge point right there, which is like, okay, if you're the best and you're watching everybody else take from you, you might as well get on board, because it doesn't matter what you think or what your existing clients think. It's matter what the cold market thinks and how you're putting yourself out there, and perception is huge now, Well,
and I think you and I can for sure, I'm going to speak for both of us when I say it scares people because they think it's going to be this really hard thing to do.
Oh yeah.
And I know you and I are firm believers in it doesn't have to be. Like it doesn't have to be this exhausting, time-consuming effort. It can be fit in pockets of the day where it pays huge dividends. It doesn't have to be this all-consuming thing.
Yeah. Well, that brings up a whole deeper subject of mindset what stories we're telling ourselves in our head. And I mean, I think we all go through it. I mean, when I first put myself out there, pretty heavily, you feel naked and afraid. No doubt about that. There's no doubt about that.
Everyone has their own way of doing it, right? Like I love how much you show up on video. I think it's awesome. I have yet to find myself to be a big video person, but I'm consistently showing up on LinkedIn in my writing or with a post. So there isn't a one size fits all strategy. If somebody else's strategy is not yours, find one, but still be consistent in your showing up, right? If you want to be perceived as an expert or a thought leader, let people see you a little bit,
Yeah. Well, and again, it's, I think people look at something, and so people will come to me and they'll be like, oh, well, do I have to be good on video? And it's like, well, no, you don't. Like, you get to pick your flavor, right? Like, this is my flavor. You get to pick yours, and they all work, right? Should you do both if you can? Yeah, you should. But if you don't, if you're like, hey, I'll never get on camera, then don't resist it. Just there's ways around it, but I think that kind of goes back into, I think what people do, it's like being back in high school, it's like peer pressure again. It's like so-and-so's doing video, so I need to. It's like, no, you don't. Like,
no, you don't.
You can find your own way, and whatever kind of works good. I think it's the consistency, same things we've been talking about. Consistency with, my overall strategy, consistency with showing up, having quality thought out messaging, and doing the details right, having your good headline, having, all of those things make an impact. But, nobody builds a brand overnight with one post, right?
No, exactly. Yeah. I talked to a student earlier. We did some of her kind of edits, and she said, it's crazy because I was sending out 200 messages and getting 1 or 2 responses. And now with what you've taught me, I'll confess it has at least initially taken a little longer, but I send out 5 messages and get 2 responses. She's like, this is a game changer. Like this, and the work is up front, because then you start to rinse and reuse and start to see what's working, and you do it again. But we need to stop being lazy. Like, I hate to shake people by the shoulders, but this is no longer a marketplace where we can just one size fits all whoosh. Like people aren't on board with that. They're not. So we have to switch it up a little bit.
Well, I think too, along those lines is another way that I look at it is, outside of being like lazy, it's just being willing to test. Sure. So many are afraid to like put something out there and go, okay, that didn't work. Let me try it this way now.
Yeah. And
once you get to that rinse and repeat point, it's huge.
Yeah. And let me choose my words better. It's not lazy. It's also just having no other strategy to choose from. A lot of people don't really know how else to do it because they've never been given a menu of options besides this one. So it's not always.
You can say it's laziness. It's okay, because it is. There is for sure some of it.
It is for some people. It is for others. It's because they don't know of the existence of another option. Right. And so I'm just here to say you don't need to send out 2,000 messages. Like, there is another option.
Yep. Benjamin Mina said, Henna Pryor rocks.
Hi, Ben.
Yep. So
Ben
thanks for
rocks
joining us,
too.
Ben.
Go listen to Ben's podcast too. He's great.
Yep. Ben, we got to get you on the show here soon too, man.
Yeah.
And that kind of brings up, I follow Ben pretty heavily on Facebook, and what he posts and stuff is different than what I post, and what you post, it's just like, have your own flavor. And I think it's almost like, you get into the habit of going through society of like, you got to fit in with the crowd, and really to be good in marketing, you want to be opposite. You want to kind of stick out a little bit like a sore thumb. You don't want to fit in with the crowd. That's where your uniqueness and like your weirdness and, the gap between my teeth and all that stuff really kind of pays off for you,
You're speaking to my heart. I mean, the first couple modules of my training are about getting rid of this idea that this is what a staffing or recruitment email needs to sound like. Like, I don't know who 30, 40 years ago decided this was the format. Right. This was the standard. And not only does it work 1,000 times better to veer from that format, but people are enjoying themselves again. They're having fun again. They're like, oh man, feels good to actually be me in my messages. I almost forgot how to do that. So the benefits are, I can't understate. They're so far and wide. And so I'm exactly with you there. Go weird, not wide. Be willing to be different.
Yep. Go weird, not wide. I like there's a quote for you. Yep. There you go. Awesome. Well, as we wrap up, those of you who are still with us, feel free to ask any last questions that you may have, Henna. Henna, who has been, who are 3 people that have been really influential to you on your journey?
I have to name 2 in the industry and 1 not. So Kai Mitchell is my former COO at Kforce. I have learned how to be an ambitious woman in leadership thanks to her. She gave me permission very early on to do things my way, on my terms, in ways that worked for me, in my voice. So I'm just very grateful to have had a strong female leader who encouraged me to be unabashedly myself early on. I mean, I was 23, 24 when I started in the industry. So having that permission early was a life changer. I'll say in recent months, I got to shout out Donnie Cahill, who's been a very vocal supporter of mine. For those who don't know, I didn't know Donnie. I cold emailed him and he got back to me right away. So if that's not proof in the pudding that I practice what I preach, and he's been so sweet to sort of share the message widely about what I'm doing. So he's a recent one, but I'm going to add him. And I hate to say it, but my husband, I know that's corny, but he's also in sales. And so there's nothing more valuable for someone who considers themselves a lifelong learner than to have someone who lives and breathes some of these same things every day that can tell you, hey, this is great, or I don't think this is that great. I don't think this is landing. And so, find that someone, whether it's somebody who lives with you or somebody who's your friend, or if it's your coworker, who can be your loving critic and tell you when something is wonderful and wants you to be successful, but can also tell you bad news or something stinks, even when it's difficult, because it will up-level you to places you never dreamed of.
Got it. I love it. And there's nothing corny about, enjoying your spouse.
To the husband.
Shout out to the husband. Is he watching?
He's awesome.
I'll make sure I record that
he's
part.
He's actually just went to go get the kids from the bus stop, I think.
We'll get him a replay of that part.
He'll watch it later.
Yeah, awesome. What about for those that are kind of, want to do a little research? I mean, what kind of books do you recommend around copy?
Yeah, I've got a couple favorites. So there's a book called Copywriting Secrets by Jim Edwards that I really enjoy. I'll tell you, my favorite books are not necessarily copywriting books. They're actually just sales and psychology books. I think just the translation of this to words is more powerful. So Daniel Pink is one of my favorite writers that has written several books on sales psychology. I'm also a huge fan of Brené Brown, even though she's not technically sales, but her Dare to Lead book has a lot of just how to influence people in a way that's more authentic and more real. So those are some off the bat, but I'm trying to think if there's anything else over. I always have my books right around me. From a copywriting standpoint, I would say that Copywriting Secrets, and there's a writer named Laura Belgray, who I really enjoy following on social media. I would say they're some of my favorites from a copy standpoint.
Awesome. And for those that are interested in getting in touch with you, what is the best way to do that?
They can either go to well, they're going to give them two places. So prioritygroup.com is my main page. You can contact me through there. recruiterscopyclinic.com is just the high level for the website. I will just make a pointer that there's a digital version available and a live version. So if you have a team, shoot me an email through that website. There's also a free guide on there. If you're just interested in more tips and tricks, you can grab that. And I'm really active on LinkedIn, and I think I'm the only Henna Pryor so far that I have found. So I'd love if anyone listening to this would link up with me there. I'm an open networker. I love to have new people in my orbit. So I'd love to connect.
Awesome. Well, Henna, thank you for joining me today and bringing all this wonderful value and all your fabulous energy to the show. If you could leave the guest with one final tip, what would it be?
Lean into your edge with your sales writing. Stop writing the same thing as everyone else. I'm a firm believer in the sheep formula. If you look and sound like everyone else, you are going to be perceived and look and sound like everyone else. If you want to stand out in this noisy, overcrowded industry, dare to be different. Don't be
love it. Absolutely love it. Thank you again, Relevant Recruiter Group. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for all the interaction and the phenomenal questions. We will be back next Wednesday for another live training. We will be back next Friday for another live interview. Next Friday, we'll have Sarah Catalet from Vantage Labs on. We're going to be talking about recruiting websites. So make sure to